Tesla that understood how you can tap in to the electrical reality beyond the world of the scene and turn it into usable warmth and power. Got a little list here of what Tesla created. These are just some of them. Alternating current and the electrical systems basically we use today. Fluorescent lights, he invented those 40 years before they were actually officially invented and put into production. X-rays was something else that he understood because he could see that there were other levels of reality and you could tap into it through electrical and electromagnetic means, radiation means. Radio. Tesla was on to the whole principle of radio before Marconi. Marconi gets the plaudits as the person who invented radio, but actually Tesla beat him to it. Remote control. I mean, we take remote control technology for granted today, but he was the first one that saw the potential of it and showed how it could work. Electric motors come down to Tesla. The laser, of course, which is absolutely at the heart of so much modern technology, goes back again to Tesla. And then wireless. Oh, yeah, I've got Wi-Fi. Yeah, we've all got Wi-Fi. Yeah, wireless communication was seen and understood and showed to work by Tesla. But the big thing, which leads us into so much that Tesla showed was possible, showed would work, is what we call free energy technology. And in many ways, this was his downfall, because the last thing that the system wants is free energy for everybody. And what I mean by that is free energy in the sense that you just tap into energetic electrical, electromagnetic fields that are already there, and free in terms of once you have the technology in place, you can tap into it at no cost. Now, of course, this is the worst nightmare of the system, because it gives people the opportunity to have power for nothing, which means you have to serve the system less to earn the money to pay for the power. So he wasn't a popular guy once he started tapping into this knowledge. And the thing about free energy technology is that we're now seeing what level of reality that he was talking about tapping into. We have an understanding now, increasingly through an area of scientific research known as the electric universe, that we are surrounded by electrical and electromagnetic fields, that actually the great communication system within this, what I say is a simulation, is understandably through electricity. We interact with the universe electrically. The brain works electrically. The genetic system also works electrically. And what he saw was the potential of tapping into that electrical, electromagnetic level of reality and turning it into usable warmth and power, which brings me to climate change. This is something that those that are pushing the climate change hoax, I don't mean the people behind the hoax that have generated it, I mean those who have bought the hoax and push it and say we've got to destroy beautiful landscapes with wind turbines all over the world. They need to just take a breath and do a bit of research, because we're told that we have to go down that road of power generation because we have to stop burning fossil fuels. Actually, when you get into the breakdown of so-called greenhouse gases, right up into the 90% are clouds and water vapor. And CO2, generated in part by human activity, but vastly more by natural means, is only a tiny fraction of the greenhouse gas breakdown. So even on that level, the idea that human activity is changing the climate, nonsense. And there are scientists who are being suppressed and not given a platform who are saying too, it's nonsense. But let's say that it's true. Let's go down that road in terms of Tesla. We're told that we have to go down all the roads of wind turbines and all the rest of it, and cut fossil fuel use. But here, I mean, this man died in a New York hotel room in 1943. In the first half of the 20th century, he understood how you create free energy technology that doesn't involve fossil fuels. And he said it. He said that all around us, he said, is all the power we need without having to use oil or gas or coal. So here's the question then. Why, if it's so desperate for us to stop using fossil fuels, so it's claimed, why is the technology of Tesla to give us all the usable power and warmth we need from the atmosphere around us, why is that being suppressed by the very same forces that are pushing the climate change hoax? Because it is a hoax. And it's no good people saying, oh, well, maybe they don't know about the Tesla technology. So much of what we have today, high technology, is based on Tesla's understanding. For instance, something that's become notorious in the last 20 years or so is HAARP in Alaska, and so-called ionosphere heater, which fires very high-powered radio waves at the ionosphere in the upper atmosphere and then bounces them back at higher power, having got the ionosphere to vibrate in sympathy and increase the power. And they can change the weather, and they can create earthquakes. Tesla, for instance, was creating lightning above his laboratory using these techniques. He, at one point, had all the area around him vibrating like a mini earthquake, and all the windows were breaking because of technology that he was inventing and developing. So when you look at the patents for the HAARP technology, it even mentions Tesla. So they know all about it, and they know the potential of it. They absolutely know the potential for giving everyone free energy sources from the very reality that we're interacting with without use of fossil fuels. Why is this never mentioned? Because climate change, the hoax, is about justifying the transformation of human society in ways that I explain in the books and the talks. And that transformation cannot take place in the way that they plan if people have access to free energy technology, and thus the world doesn't have to then change. They have no excuse to change it in the way they want. And that's the reason why they say on one side climate change is destroying the world, brackets, nonsense, but on the other, they're suppressing this man's knowledge and this man's technological inventions that would transform the world. I mean, no one needs to be cold anymore. No one needs to be without power anymore. It's all there, and it's being suppressed. And this guy is still being acknowledged for the greatness that he brought to science. All these decades later, he was so far ahead of the game. And what people need to do today, not least the climate change zealots, is to get some research done, look into what this guy, Nikola Tesla, created and shown was possible, and then start asking yourself, why is this being suppressed? at the very time we're told that we need to change the way that we generate power. And so that, and the climate change hoax, becomes blatantly obvious.
And when you bring sound into things, you can create form through sound as it comes out of the no thing. This is a series of particles that have been put into that shape purely by playing sound of a certain note across the particles. So when we sit in meditation, we go, well, not that I do much actually, I just get on with my life, but a lot of people do, and good luck to them. And you go into this place of silence, of no thing, of no thought, consciousness, the all-knowing. And in the realm of creation, from that no thing, that all possibility, we have different dimensions of experience reality, which are different frequency ranges. So we have higher dimensions from this one, we have lower dimensions from this one, and you know, keep out of them, I would say, for reasons I'll come to. But in that little frequency range in the middle, where our vehicle is decoding the frequency range of that dimension we call the physical world, that's where we are experiencing all the things we think is everything. But there are many other dimensions, and they interact with this one, which will become very important in the second half. Now, the body is a biological computer. By biological, I mean it has the ability to think for itself and assess information, not just react to data in a programmed way. It has the ability to think for itself up to a point. And it is the vehicle through which we experience this reality. When you want to go on the internet, you can't just go on the internet. You have to have an interface, a vehicle that takes you onto the internet so you can experience it, and we call it a computer. Well, in the same way, obviously in a vastly more sophisticated way, consciousness experiences this reality, formless consciousness experiences this reality through the body computer that we also call mind. It's like a genetic spacesuit that allows us to experience somewhere that normally we couldn't do. I mean, if I didn't have an outer shell that vibrated within the frequency range that I want to experience, I couldn't pick that bottle up. My consciousness, pure consciousness, can't pick that bottle up because the vibrational difference is so vast. So I take on an outer shell. That's what the body is, and we've come to believe that it's who we are. That's the trick, and that's how we've got caught. So it makes racism a nonsense, because we're all the same one consciousness. It's funny. Are you going to tell them or me? And humans, what we think we are, humans, what are you? I'm a human. It's a software program. It's a way of experiencing this reality, and the software program has different forms. We call them Australians and British and Croats and what have you. Now, DNA is like a software code. This is from an article on DNA in the San Francisco Chronicle by some physicist. It says DNA is a universal software code. From bacteria to humans, the basic instructions for life are written with the same language. And the difference in the language compared with the difference in the form that it expresses is fantastic. I mean, the difference between the DNA of a mouse and a human is negligible compared with the massive difference in outward expression. And these four codes, A, C, G, and T, depending on how they relate to each other, depends on whether you're a mouse or a virus or a human in physical form. And on another level, it expresses itself as digital. It's a digital construct here, which is why numbers are so important to these secret societies. And they're now having more and more development of what they call human-computer interface, where they can connect a human brain to a computer, and the brain works the computer without touching any keyboards. Now, the reason they can do that is because Although they're very different in sophistication, they're actually connecting two computers. That's what they're doing. So the human body, if you look at the computer analogy, it's ticking box after box. What do we say when the computer gets a virus or something, and it gets slower and slower, and then eventually it won't even switch on? It happened to a computer I had a few years ago. It won't even switch on. What do we say? My computer's dead. Yeah. And what happens when its life force has been switched off, electricity? It goes cold, just like the human body does when its life force is gone. Computers go into sleep mode, where they're just ticking over and using minimum energy. That's what we do. That's what our body computers do. We have an immune system, which is our version, fantastically more advanced, of Norton antivirus or something, where it is there to pick up attacks on the body, as the antivirus technology is on computers, and stop them killing the computer. They both work on the same principle. This is a picture taken by a team at the Icke hospital in Paris, where they put a dye into the acupuncture meridians that acupuncture is based on, and so many say don't exist, and then they photographed what they saw afterwards. And when you look at it, the first thing I said when I saw that was, it's a motherboard. And interestingly, what they found, because acupuncture is based on making sure the energy going around these meridian lines stays in balance. It's what the needles are put in for. And because the lines are circular, it means that if you've got a line going round the foot and up the body and round the head, you can actually cure a headache by taking a blockage out of that line that goes through the head at the level of the foot. And people go, you can't cure a headache by putting a pin in the foot. Well, you can if you don't understand what you're doing. And what they found is when this energy, which the Chinese call qi, is traveling around the body too slowly, or too quickly, I guess, as well, but certainly too slowly, then the body becomes ill in some way. Now, why is that? What do we say when information's passing around our computers too slow? We say, oh, my computer's not working well today. It's too slow. It's always ever so slow. And why is that? Because the information's not passing around the computer quick enough to be optimum speed. Well, when that qi energy is not passing around the body at optimum speed, exactly the same thing is happening, because that qi energy is information. The whole of this reality is information being decoded. The brain is the central processing unit of the computer. It filters all the information traffic. Of course, it's a microchip in a computer. And the brain is constantly decoding information and decoding or constructing our reality, and the messages are going around the body. The DNA and the genetic structure is like the hard drive, and the energetic version of the hard drive we call the aura, where information is held. Tremendous amounts of information are held in this genetic, energetic field. What we call cultures and races are just different software programs within the main computer system we call humans. Different experiences. This guy, William Sheridan, was having a heart transplant in a New York hospital. And while he was waiting to have the operation, he did an art therapy course. And he drew very childlike pictures, about as good as I would draw, because I'm rubbish at drawing. And then he had the operation, the heart transplant, and when he went back and recovered, he went back on the art therapy course, and started drawing much more sophisticated pictures that were coming out from he didn't know where. There's a couple of different versions that were in newspapers. And the art therapy person didn't know what was going on. But there are doctors who have documented how people have changed after transplants. Heart transplants is the big one, but lung transplants and other ones. How they have not only taken on personality traits of the donor, but have also taken on gifts and abilities of the donor that they didn't have before. Why? Because the transplant is the equivalent of a computer download. The transplanted organ and its energetic field hold information from the previous person's body computer, and that gets downloaded into the recipient, and they start getting affected by that information. It's all information. This is a great friend of mine, Credo Mutwa, a Zulu shaman in South Africa, and he said to me, back in the days when they used to eat people, they had this rule where they had to cook the people to a certain temperature, otherwise the idea was, or the legend was, that you became those people if you ate them at too low a temperature. Now, of course, when it comes to self-identity, I guess nothing's more powerful than believing that we are a man or a woman. But we're not. We are consciousness having an experience as a man or a woman, which is another computer program, another way of experience. How can we be, how can what we are be, a man or a woman, when by certain chemical and changes and uses of drugs, you can move from a man to a woman in a very, very powerful way? How can you do that? It's because what they're doing is changing the construct of the computer, and it's moving between a man and a woman. How can we be men or women as who we are, not what we're experiencing, if that's the case? This is just a slide to remind me of this story. A few years ago, we had a chicken in Britain called Freaky the chicken. And it was called Freaky because it started off as a hen, laying eggs, all the rest of it. And then, because they'd had a testosterone explosion, which happens from time to time apparently out of nowhere, it started to become a cockerel. It grew a comb on its head, started crowing at dawn, and it was chasing the chickens, chasing the hens. Now, how can we be male or female when chemical changes can move you from one to the other? We can't be. It's another illusion. This is what I got off the BBC website once. Scientists have been able to take control of flies' brains to make females behave just like males. Researchers genetically modified the insects so that a group of brain cells that control sexual behavior could be switched on by a pulse of light. The team was able to get female fruit flies to produce a courtship song, behavior usually seen in males. How can that be who we are when you can get hold of the brain and change who we are? Why is it when I'm writing a book at the moment, when I'm doing that, I get up real early, and in the winter, before the sun comes up, and I'm sitting there writing, and then the sun starts to come up, and all the birds start singing. I mean, is there a bird with a baton saying Q? It just happens. Why does it happen? Because it's a computer program. Why did the Freaky the chicken, when it started to grow a comb, why did it start crowing at dawn? Did someone tell them that's what cockerels do? No. It's the program that had changed, and so it reacted to program. Then another thing we think is that our emotions are who we are. Oh, he's very emotional, she's very emotional. But what are emotions? How can emotions be who we are? And by the way, near-death experiences say in large numbers, I didn't feel the same emotions as I did when I was in the body. These fierce emotions of stress and anger and all the rest of it, I didn't feel them. How can emotions be who we are when a chemical change, again, can affect us fundamentally emotionally? We had a woman in England a few years ago who was a clinical depressive for 40 years, in and out of institutions. And she was in a real terrible state, and she went into it real quickly. And after 40 years, someone said to her, can you think of anything that happened about the time this started? And the only thing she could think of was she had, I think it was 19 tooth fillings with mercury. So she was advised to have the mercury fillings taken out. She went on a mercury detox, and the 40 years of clinical depression disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Now, if you'd have asked that woman for 40 years, who are you? She'd say, I'm a clinical depressive. No! It was an imbalance caused by mercury for 40 years. Yet we identify who we are with our emotions. We even identify who we are with our thoughts. If you just can sit quietly and just move your awareness back and just watch your thoughts pass by. Listen to them as they go past. And you can sit and you can observe thoughts passing through your mind. And then you think, hold on a second, if I'm observing these thoughts, who's observing? Consciousness. Because thought is a very, very low level of awareness. Knowing comes from consciousness. Thought comes from mind, because thought's trying to work it out. That's why we constantly have the chatter in the head. Good habits, bad habits. Are they really who we are, or are they the computer program? So this false identity is built up through lack of understanding of who we are, and that's what holds us in the trap. Comes down to two sides of the brain as well, which fundamentally affect our behavior and our perception. This is a lovely picture by Neil Haig. The left side of the brain is where we use our language, and it's about structure. It's about the world that we see. It's about the intellect. It's about seeing everything as apart from everything else and nothing in unity. And it loves structure, and it loves rules and regulations. Ooh, give me another rule. I'm a left brain. Ooh. And the right brain is where we get our connection out, as well as the heart, into the great beyond, the higher levels of awareness. That's where, and because, we get our creativity from. This is the artist. This is the person who has creativity. That's where the maverick lives, in the right brain. Because the right brain tends to see everything in unity. When people take psychoactive drugs, they change the way the brain decodes reality, and that's why we've had very strange experiences. Well, I've only done it once. I had a fantastic experience, but some people have very bad ones. But this is the point of all this. This is what the system does, and this is why it does it. It puts symbolically soldiers on the door to the left brain, because it doesn't want its slaves realizing they are actually free. So we live not just in a mind-made world, we live in a left brain reality constructed world of structure, of exams, of information indoctrination, of limitation and sense of limitation, where communication can only be in words, of course, because everything else is just mumbo-jumbo paranormal nonsense, telepathy rubbish. Got to do it with words, because I'm a left brain. And these are put there, called teachers, politicians, scientists, doctors, ourselves, that keep us from understanding who we are, and we get completely lost in the left brain reality, thinking it is what we are and where we are. This man, Albert Camus, said an intellectual is someone whose mind watches itself. And when a mind watches itself, it is a form of insanity. Why? Because when a mind is watching a mind, where is the consciousness? Nothing wrong with the intellect if it serves the experience of consciousness, but when it becomes the governor of perception and the governor of possibility, then we have the kind of world we live in now. Would the right brain go to war? No bloody chance. Would the left brain go to war? My God, how long has it been doing that? Century after century after century. It's the left brain reality, which we are manipulated to perceive reality through, that makes this world crazy while thinking it's sane. That's where the prison planet comes from. The prison of the left brain reality. And it's that which holds us in this round and round and round, getting nowhere life. René Descartes, the French mathematician and philosopher, defined self-awareness As I think, therefore I am. What he was falling for was the idea that mind and thought is who we are. At the level of mind, not consciousness, I would update that and say it's actually, I compute, therefore I am. Because so much of what we do that we take to be personal choice and decisions is actually just following the program, thinking it's us. Because those behind the scenes understand how the body works and its computer nature, they understand how to program it. This is what was going on all the time. It's mass hypnosis. You know, when you go on a stage, or you see people on a stage in a hypnotist stage show, what does he do? He implants into the mind, programs the brain to believe a certain reality, i.e., the potato you are holding in your hand is actually an apple. And the person will eat the potato, and they'll believe it's an apple, and they will taste an apple. Why? Because as the electrical signal carrying the information from the potato hits the brain is programmed not to read that, but to read that being an apple. And it's a computer. You can program it to do that if you know what you're doing. That's what these people are doing. People like this guy in Britain, becoming pretty well known in America now too, Paul McKenna. He goes on to TV shows. He'll get somebody who's frightened of spiders or heights or some phobia, and at the end of the show he'll bring them back, and they'll either be much better, sometimes completely cured in terms of their phobia. What has he done? He's simply deleted the program. He's deleted the program that's frightened of spiders or frightened of flying or frightened of heights. The consciousness is frightened of spiders. Consciousness is all that is, has been, and ever will be. Is frightened of flying or heights? No. The body computer program can be, though, and that's what he's doing. This is a major television program in Britain called Top Gear. It's a motoring program, but it's much more than that. And this Paul McKenna in the background there, without this guy's conscious awareness, he programmed him, and they went out, and this guy, his name's Richard Hammond, one of the presenters, he thought he was going to drive around a racetrack with Paul McKenna in the car. And they showed this on film, and Paul Hammond comes to the car, and Paul McKenna just said to him a key word, or snapped his fingers, boom, and out of nowhere, this Richard Hammond guy's gone, boom, middle sentence. And then he said, when you get into the car, you're not going to have any idea how to drive it. And he comes back, he doesn't know that's just happened. Gets in the car, doesn't even know where to put the ignition key. This is a guy who's mad about cars. And they come back in the studio, and they're all having a laugh about it live, and Richard Hammond thinks it's all over. And then McKenna, who's sitting next to him in the studio, says the word again, and his head goes down, sitting in the studio chair like that. And he tells him that this toy car is his real 911 Turbo. And it brings him back, he walks over, he gets in the car as if it's his Turbo, and this other guy called Clarkson, Jeremy Clarkson, he then drives across the studio and hits him in the side of the car with another toy car, and he reacts as if he's just had his real car hit. And these people at the core of this conspiracy, which I'll get deeply into in the second section, who know how all this works, can't do that en masse to the human population by using these techniques. Of course they do. It's a mind control, mass hypnosis. They've put humanity to sleep. As Voltaire said, so long as the people do not care to exercise their freedom, those who wish to tyrannize will do so. For tyrants are active and ardent, and will devote themselves in the name of any number of gods, religious and otherwise, to put shackles upon sleeping men. And it helps if you make sure the men are sleeping, and the women are sleeping, and the children are sleeping before you start. We can talk forever about how we deal with the banking scams and engineered wars. Waste of time until we get this right. We start to realize that we've had our minds taken away, and we need to get them back through this hypnosis. This guy's a hypnotist. He doesn't know he is. The newsreaders on Croatian news, And the current affairs programs and the BBC, they're all bloody hypnotists. Because what are they doing? They are constantly repeating false realities to people as if they're real. And 99% of them think they're real. This is what the media does, owned by these families. It's about brainwashing, programming the computer, the Pied Piper, leading us nowhere. And because of this, we live in a world full of repeaters. Not questioners, not investigators, not researchers, not even thinkers, but repeaters, just repeating what we've heard from someone else as if it's true. It's like Oscar Wilde, a brilliant British writer said, most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions, their lives are mimicry, their passions are quotation. So, we have teacher repeaters. They're repeating what the curriculum tells them they have to tell children. And they're repeating what they learned in their academic careers and at teacher training college. We have doctor repeaters repeating what the medical schools told them that are controlled by the pharmaceutical drug companies, who also tell them through the drug reps and free trips abroad to places with white beaches and palm trees what they should believe about the way to treat people, i.e. give them more of our drugs. We have scientist repeaters who just repeat the party line and get the funding as a reward instead of being real open-minded scientific investigators. We have journalist repeaters. Oh my goodness, I've been in that profession. Repeaters. Politician repeaters. I love this line down here. Being bent over so long they think it's standing up. Don't say what you really believe, because it's a bad career move. It's like a journalist writing what he really believes if it's anti-system. I want to be Prime Minister, I've got to keep my head down and say what the party wants. And then there's people repeaters. The best one is, everybody knows that. Oh really? How many have spoken of this, everyone? Well, it's in the paper. So this combination of human repeaters and media, and they're all hypnotists. And if we succumb to it, we take on the false identity. So seeing is believing. That's what we hear. Seeing is believing, but it's not. Believing is seeing, because beliefs affect the way we decode reality. Therefore, what we think, we see. And we're constantly being manipulated second by second to take on beliefs that will allow us to perceive reality as they want us to see it. And I've had loads of experiences myself like this. In the early 1990s, when I started, I was a national television presenter with the BBC. Well-known face, because she just, sat there and said good evening, welcome, and all that stuff that they do. Long time ago now. And then I started coming out with this weird stuff, apparently. And I got massive, massive ridicule. And I would meet people, and I'd talk to them, and I would say things to them that were mainstream scientific norms. And they'd laugh. Why? Because they had a preconceived idea of me, a belief, he's mad. So anything I said went through the filter, he's mad. So even when I was saying things that scientific mainstream was talking about, they laughed. Because that's the way they decoded reality. And what happens is, the brain, like I say, receives electrical information and then constructs reality from that. And what they found is that when you have certain beliefs, rigid beliefs, rigid is a very good word, the neurons in the brain fire off in a certain sequence. And what that is symbolic of is the way the brain is reading reality in a fixed way. This is why you can talk to someone with fixed beliefs, and it don't matter what you say, it's like talking to a wall, because they're not hearing what you say. Because their brain is not filtering what you say in any way that will challenge the belief system. It's there to defend the belief system, to not hear it. So we're in such a crazy situation in terms of the reality we think we're in compared with the reality we think we are, that our state is vibrational, energetic, our prime state. And only when it passes through the brain decoding system does it become what we call physical in there. And we can be open to multi-levels of reality, not just this one, or we can be closed boxes when we're in that auric state and we get caught in the groove, boom, 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 just repeating the same cycles. And of course, the thing to emphasize here is that mainstream scientists who are stuck in the left brain, 99% of the mainstream science comes from the left brain. It's the cutting edge stuff, it's some of the quantum physics stuff that goes into the right brain. That's why they can start to see things. The left brainers can't. But the scientist is also decoding reality from a fixed state. So he'll look at something, and instead of looking at it open-mindedly and seeing all the possibilities of what it could be, he's reading reality based on the belief system and only reading that which confirms the belief overwhelmingly. And we have a thing in Britain called pantomimes at Christmas. They're like for kids and families. And one of the things about pantomimes is, one of the things that they do in all of them is someone standing with the audience, and then somebody comes behind them, and the kids in the audience starts shouting, "He's behind you, he's behind you." And then the guy turns round, and this guy goes with him, and he says, "No, there's nobody there, no, he's behind you." Now that's what is happening with scientists, because they look at something in an experiment, but they're decoding it through the left brain. So they're not actually seeing all the possibilities that exist before them, and that's why science goes round and round and round in circles and doesn't move on. As Einstein said, "Science without religion is lame, religion without silence is blind." I'd go further than that. Science without consciousness is lame, religion without consciousness is blind. In fact, religion with consciousness means no religion, I would suggest. So this reality can be, I guess, brought down to this analogy. We live in a holographic internet. I call it the cosmic internet or the holographic internet. If you say to someone, "Tell me about the internet," they'll say it's websites and words and images on a screen. Well, yes, it is. But only on that level, the screen, does the internet exist in that form. Everywhere else, it's electrical circuits, etc., etc. You say to people, "Tell me about television." They'll say, "Yeah, it's pictures on a screen, moving pictures on a screen." Yes, it is. But the only place that television exists in that form is on the screen. Everywhere else, it's vibrational fields and electrical circuits and all the rest of it. And we are the same. The only place that this reality exists is on our screen, which is when we construct it in here. And this is why a number of scientists have said over the years that they believe, and people go, "What?" They believe that this reality only exists when it's observed. It only exists in this form when it's observed. Well, now we can start to see why that is true. Because it is the act of observation, decoding, that brings this reality from the vibrational through the electrical into the construct we call the physical world. When we're not observing it, it's just a vibrational construct. So what is the matrix, as they call it, this reality? It's energetic information. It's all information. And we're decoding information and sending out information which others decode, and that's how it comes together. Now, on another level, the body is a liquid crystal, a liquid quartz crystal. And what are they used primarily for in technology? Receiving and transmitting information. Why are we liquid crystals? Because we are transmitters and receivers of information. That's what we are. We have trillions of cells, and the membrane of every cell is a liquid crystal. We are crystalline form. And how that crystal decodes reality, what it tunes into in terms of frequencies, decides the experience that we have in terms of the the world that we experience. DNA is crystalline, and it's a receiver. This is from an article I read on DNA. From the characteristic form of this giant molecule, a wound double helix, the DNA represents an ideal electromagnetic antennae. On one hand, it is elongated and thus a blade which can take up very well electrical pulses. On the other hand, seen from above, it has the form of a ring and thus is a very magnetical antennae. It allows us to pick up the information in the construct and turn it into this reality. This is what the shaman source called Don Juan, I believe, of the Carlos Castaneda books said about this, and he's absolutely spot on. We are perceivers. We are awareness. We are not objects. We have no solidity. We are boundless. We, or rather our reason, forget this, and thus we entrap the totality of ourselves in a vicious circle from which we rarely emerge in our lifetime until we wake up. And so when you look at the way we're manipulated through words and education, programmed, through religion, through all this shite we have in food, electro and chemical manipulation, and through the manipulation of information, news and everything, these are all together affecting the way we receive and transmit information by affecting the way we interact with information. And it creates a vibrational prison which we experience as being, as people say, stuck in the box. Stuck in the bubble, stuck in a world of bewilderment where we're floating around, unable to get a grasp on what the hell we are, where we are, and what's going on. These computer connections, these crystalline transmitter-receiver connections, are not, as this is portrayed, connected by wires. Of course not. The way it all works, the way this matrix, this virtual reality works, is exactly the same as the wireless internet. If this theater has wireless internet, I can't see it. Where the hell is it? It's in the no thing, or appears to be. But if it was there, I could program this computer to pick it up out of no thing, and on that screen would come the World Wide Web out of this. And that's what this construct is, this virtual reality universe. It is information operating on vibrational levels that we can't, with invisible light, see. But the body computer system and the receiver-transmitter crystalline system picks it up and turns it into this reality. Now, when we get to the second section and the manipulation, this will become stunningly relevant. So in the Matrix, you had this scene where the Neo character is with the Morpheus guy, and Morpheus is saying, the Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. He was describing there the wireless internet that is the construct of this virtual reality universe. We can see in China where they firewall off vast chunks of the internet so they can't access those areas of the internet that would give them information those in authority in China don't want the population to have. Well, as we'll come to in the second half, I strongly believe that's been done to us through genetic manipulation, to firewall the body computer off from levels of reality that we once, long back, experienced, when we were connected to all that is. when this was a very different world, what they call in the ancient writings the Golden Age. And slowly but surely, especially when the genetic manipulation started, our minds were taken over and our sense of reality was hijacked. Putting bubbles within bubbles within bubbles, boxes within boxes, virtual realities we think are real. What is reality? It's the range of frequencies that we are decoding and how we are decoding them. This is a brilliant book by a guy called Michael Talbot, written in the early 1990s about the holographic universe, which is what we live in. And he tells a story in there which kind of really encapsulates what I've been saying. He was at a party at his father's house, just a party, and his father had a stage hypnotist come along to do some party tricks. And he was doing all the usual stuff. And then there was this guy called Tom sitting in the chair, and the hypnotist said to him, "When I bring you back to a waking state, you're not going to be able to see your daughter in the room." So he brings him back, apparently, to a waking state, just like that Richard Hammond was apparently awake after the first sequence in the car. And before he did that, the hypnotist had put his daughter right in front of the father's chair. So he's looking into her stomach. And so he brings him out and he says, "Tom, there's your daughter in the room. Can you see her?" And Tom's looking around. He can't see her. She's here. No, she's not here. So the hypnotist went behind the daughter and put his hand in the small of her back and said, "I'm holding something, Tom. What am I holding?" It seemed obvious to him. He said, "You're holding a watch." "Daughter's here." He said, "There's an inscription on the watch. Can you read it?" He peered forward. He read the inscription. If I said that to people, most people, they say that's impossible. Impossible. It's ridiculous. But it isn't. Because everything in that room, its prime state, is energetic, vibrational. If he, Tom, doesn't decode that vibrational information into apparently physical information, holographic information, as I'll come to in a second, then nothing in that room exists in physical form. Now, what the hypnotist has done has programmed his brain not to read his daughter's energy field, vibrational field, into holographic physical reality. So he does it to everything else in the room except his daughter. So to him, his daughter's not in the room because he can't see her at the level of the conscious mind, because she's not entered the level of the conscious mind through the decoding system. Everyone else in the room has not been programmed not to read the daughter so they can see her in physical form. Now imagine again, if you are a few with a vicious agenda for this world, and you know that, and you know how to manipulate that, and the population don't. So this was his daughter, but he never decoded her through the brain into that, so she never became that, so she was never in the room to him. Once you get into these deep levels, the apparently paranormal becomes perfectly logical. We're supposed to live in a solid world. Everything seems solid. Whoa, solid. And bang your head on that, it'll hurt. Why? Because that's the way we're decoding reality. In fact, it's not physical at all. How can anything be physical when the atoms that make up the physical world, scientists tell us, turn out to be empty? As one of them said, if you take the nucleus in the center of an atom to be a 10p piece, or a 10-cent piece, as he said, then the rest of the atom will have to be about the size of a cathedral to match the measurements between the nucleus and the rest of the atom. And yet that makes up this solid world? Of course not. We do, by decoding it to the appearance of solidity. And we do it through a system called holograms, holographic reality. This is a studio where they make holograms. Of course, you can buy them in the shops in a less sophisticated way. For those that haven't come across them, how they make them is they have a laser beam. Part of it goes and hits a photographic plate, pretty much direct. Another part of the laser beam is reflected away across whatever it is they want to photograph, and then deflected back to hit the photographic plate and collide with the other half of the laser beam that's pretty much gone direct. And what this does is create what they call an interference pattern. It's the very same principle as dropping two pebbles in a pond, and as the wave patterns come out and collide, that wave pattern is a wave reflection of where those pebbles dropped, how far between them, how heavy they were, all the rest of it. In the same way, on the photographic print, this looks just like a fingerprint, funnily enough. On the photographic print, this is a holographic print, it's a series of waves. And those waves are a wave representation of the object that has been holographically photographed. Then you take another laser and you fire it at that pattern, and miraculous things happen. Apparently three-dimensional forms appear, that the best of them look as solid as you and me. But you can put your hand through them because they're illusory solidity, illusory three-dimensional forms. And it's interesting because when I went to America to speak in January, I was at the airport, and there was this absolute mainstream scientific magazine in Britain called The New Scientist, and on the front page was, "You are a hologram projected from the edge of the universe." And what the article said was so far off the cutting edge it was unbelievable, but at least they're starting to see that this is the way things are moving. Now, when you look at holograms, they have a remarkable characteristic, and that is that every part of the hologram is a smaller part of the whole. So when you get a holographic print and you cut it in four and put the laser on the four pieces, you don't get a quarter of the whole picture, you get a quarter-sized version of the whole picture. Not a quarter part, a quarter version. And this is fundamental to understanding this. Alternative healing methods like reflexology and acupuncture in many of its forms, who have done what? They've found different parts of the body that if you use them and manipulate them in certain ways can affect other parts of the body, like organs. They can treat the heart from the foot, or the liver from the hand, and all this stuff. And acupuncture has points on the ear that relates to all the other parts of the body. And people say, that's impossible. No, it's not. Why? Because the body is a hologram. And therefore, every single part of the body is a smaller version of the whole. And therefore, you can treat the whole from those smaller versions that we are talking about here, like parts of the foot and parts of the ear. I met this doctor in America, Harvey Biggleton, who wrote this book, Holographic Blood, and I looked at inside my own blood through this really powerful microscope, and there's all holographic pictures in it. Everything's holographic. As above, so below. That's what they say, don't they? As above, so below. What does that mean? It means that the universe and us is a hologram. That's why the energy fields of the body mirror the energy fields of the earth. So we are the universe. Even on a physical level, we are the universe because we are a fundamental smaller version of the universe, well, what I call the super hologram. My God, we've come a long way from Charlie Smith and Ethel Jones. That's who we are, even on a physical level. It's a miracle. No such thing as miracles. It's just about the way we decode reality. How can an illusion burn an illusion? It can't unless we think it can, and then it bloody hurts. That's why people go into other levels of consciousness. They can walk through fire and not be burned. Because if they will not decode the burn, they cannot be burnt because it's all an illusion. There is no spoon. It is not the spoon that bends. It is only yourself, exactly. So, we can realize that William Blake was right when he said this. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. And that's what we are. And what the conspiracy has done is to persuade us that we're not. So what they're looking for is an incessant centralization of power, which is what's been going on century after century and getting ever faster. And this is what they're looking for: a world government that would dictate to every country, a world central bank that will control world finance, world currency, eventually no cash, no currencies, physical currencies, just electronic money, one world electronic currency. One world army that would impose the will of the world government, a microchip population where children are microchipped at birth as a matter of course, and then at least 4, possibly more, but at least 4 super-state unions under that. The European Union evolved out of a free trade zone. The American Union evolved out of another free trade zone, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Pacific Union, Asia and the East, evolved out of APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and the African Union, which they already have, which was evolved out of the Organization of African Unity. And the idea is there, the next stage, nation-states are to be broken up eventually into regions to de-unify in a unified response to that edifice of power above, and at the bottom of that little lot come the people. That's what they want, because then people can sit around one table in the world government and dictate to that whole pyramid of power. So that's where they want to go, but just keep in mind that what this is really going on in the background. That's the physical expression of it. It's stopping people realizing their consciousness, pulling them into that, manipulating the virtual reality they decode, and therefore experience. Okay, once upon a virtual reality. This is one reality that leads us to where we are now. And I've got to go real quick through some of this because there's a hell of a lot of dots to connect in this section. Eons ago, there were, it seems, great land masses, civilizations in the Atlantic and in the Pacific called Lemuria, or Mu, and the one in the Atlantic, Atlantis, which went down amid great cataclysmic events. Some people say around 11,500 years ago, some people say much further. And certainly when there's a great book called When the Earth Nearly Died, that I read many years ago, where these two writers and researchers put together the legends of people all over the world. I mean, the so-called Great Flood and all that stuff, it's not just in the Bible, it's in every culture in the world. And they put all those legends and descriptions of what happened alongside the geological and biological evidence which you can find around the Earth, and they found that they correlated with incredible synchronicity. They told the same story of great cataclysmic events, and of course the most famous one is the story of Noah. But the story of Noah is just a rewrite of a story told thousands of years before, and indeed all around the world, where the Noah figure is given a different name in different cultures. So many of the Bible stories, the vast majority of them, are just much older stories which were rewritten. They put the new heroes, name for the heroes, and they put it in a different historical setting and time scale, but they were just the same stories. Before this great cataclysmic time, which I call the schism, if you look at the ancient accounts, they describe it as a golden age. It seems to be a time of harmony and a time when the way that humans interacted with the world and each other and reality was very different. When, from our point of view, people lived for fantastic ages and it was a time of harmony. And then came this, what I call the schism, which took many forms. And one seems to have been an energetic schism, which brought about this geological catastrophe, which brought an end to that very, very advanced civilization or civilizations called Mu and Atlantis, which appear to be in many, many ways further ahead, much further ahead technologically than we are now. And this energetic schism, and something else that I'll come to, a genetic schism, manipulation, changed the nature of life in this reality from one of harmony and connection, where we were in this world but not of it, to one where life changed and became very, very much more primitive. And if people think, well, you know, evolution can't go back, it can only go forward. Well, imagine today if there were enormous geological events which made it impossible for us to have electricity or use oil and all these things we take for granted. Look at what happened in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. It was basically back to every man for themselves, a dog-eat-dog kind of existence for some time after that, because all those services we take for granted and things we take for granted disappeared. Imagine if you had a massive one on a virtually global scale, if not global scale, and that all that other stuff came to an end. It would go back to a kind of a primitive existence, and then the memory of the very advanced time would just be a memory, and increasingly a memory, and it would just be carried in stories, and more that time, what we call time passed, this mind construct called time, they'd think it became like fantasy and just legend and myth. That's what would happen now if it happened today. And in the Bible it talks about the fall of man, and how suddenly life changed for humanity in this Garden of Eden. Now, we talk about the Garden of Eden in the Bible. The Garden of Eden is mentioned in tablets from Sumer, in what we call Iraq, thousands of years before Christianity. The Garden of Eden was just a rewrite of them. It goes back much further. Now, a lot of these very advanced Atlanteans and Lemurians or Muans moved out of those lands before and as a result of the cataclysmic events, and they located in other areas. And they took with them this advanced knowledge of reality and all the rest of it to these other lands, and it took on, it went in its own way. From that original one knowledge, it went into isolated areas as eventually the world recovered from the cataclysms, and it went off in its own way, but it was still the same basic knowledge. And some of the areas where, long after this cataclysmic time, advanced societies started to appear, these are some of them, and the knowledge reimplanted itself, but went off and was expressed in different ways. My friend, the Zulu shaman, Credo Mutwa in South Africa, a couple of times he threw the bones for me. And throwing the bones, they're carved bones carved into symbols. And because everything is energy, when you carve something to represent something, or you make something to represent something, whether it's a picture or a symbol or whatever, it resonates to that energy field, to that frequency that it represents, because everything's energy, everything's consciousness. So when you put your hands over these bones in the basket before he throws them, what you're doing is connecting your energy field, which carries the blueprint of you, subconscious and conscious, into the energy fields of those bones. And where those bones are going to fall when he throws them in relationship to each other is already decided before they're thrown by the magnetic connections that have been made. And he throws them. And he reads where they are in relation to each other and all the rest of it, in terms of trying to read the future and all that. Whether you agree with that or not, that's not the point. But I thought when he did it, this is just throwing the rune stones in Europe. It's exactly the same thing. It's just picking out the tarot cards. The reason you pick out this tarot card and not that one is your magnetic field makes a connection to the magnetic field of that card, which represents a certain symbol, therefore a frequency, and you pull that one out and not that one because of that magnetic connection. Well, what I'm saying is, all over the world, there were different ways of expressing this knowledge, because now we had isolated societies, at least for a time, instead of the one society we had before. And this knowledge that came out of these advanced civilizations, that was the knowledge massively advanced, even from where we are now, some of it, that built these inexplicable, fantastic ancient structures. I mean, this is in Peru. These are hundreds of tons. You can't get a cigarette paper between them. I mean, what do? was it, on their back, pulled by ropes? I mean, what's going on here? It was fantastic what they did. These are the Nazca lines in Peru, where you can only see these depictions of animals and insects, which are all one line scored in the surface of the earth at 1,000, 2,000 feet. And they were only seen in their entirety, when people started flying over them. So they were quite obviously, this very advanced knowledge in the ancient world. And some of it survived in some areas after the flood, the catastrophe. And these are some of the early states of the old world. They call it the old world, but actually it was the world recovering after the cataclysmic events. And this area of Mesopotamia is particularly important to the story I'm going to tell. And in these areas, and in many other areas, in fact, if you really go into it, every other area of the world, they tell a story which is repeated in the Bible, in Genesis. And where did Genesis come from? It came from ancient tablets from ancient Sumer in what is now Iraq and was also Babylon. A provable fact, because when you decode these, translate these tablets found in what is now Iraq in the 19th century and since, they tell stories that are in the Bible long before anyone had heard of Christianity or the Bible. And this is a key one that is repeated using different words and different names all over the world. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were old, men of renown. Now this story of an interbreeding between a non-human race, which were perceived as the gods, and humans creating hybrid bloodlines, is universal all over the world. And it certainly can be found in enormous abundance in the Indus Valley, now of course called India, that area, and in Sumer, which also became Babylon and what we now call Iraq. There they tell the story in the Sumerian tablets of the Anunnaki, who the gods as they were perceived to interbred with humans, creating these hybrid bloodlines. And the purest of them became known as the royal bloodlines. And it was this interbreeding that led to this whole idea of the divine right to rule. The divine right to rule, what does that mean? It means the right to rule because of your bloodline, because of your DNA, because of your computer program. We have a head of state in Britain, Queen Elizabeth II, who is only head of state because of her DNA, because of her family bloodline. That's how you become head of state. Now, how did this come about? It comes about way, way back from the idea that these bloodlines were special because they were the bloodlines of the gods, not the divine right, the bloodline of the gods. And the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is just vastly, anyway, a rewrite of these Sumerian stories, which came about when the Israelites were held in captivity in Babylon for, was it 70 years or so, when they got access, and the scribes and the Levites, etc., got access to these Sumerian stories. That's why the story of Moses being found in the bulrushes, etc., etc., is a rewrite of King Sargon from Mesopotamia, thousands of years earlier, which the same story was told. So this land, the land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, which became Sumer, an incredibly advanced culture. It's what even mainstream historians call the cradle of civilization, but it wasn't. It was the re-emergence of some sort of civilization after the cataclysmic events. And Sumer kind of came out of nowhere very, very fast. Didn't kind of build up to it, or there's no evidence of that. It just came out of nowhere and later became Babylon, and it's now Iraq. Now, these bloodlines that came out of Sumer, I mean, these hybrid bloodlines were seeded all over the world, but these ones here really are, from my research over 20 years anyway, the real important ones in terms of the bloodlines and the families that are in control of the world today, or are trying to be in complete control. They've not made it quite yet. And the invasion of Iraq is not just for oil. It's not just for this, it's not just for that, it's for many, many reasons combined. But one of them is, it's this land, Mesopotamia, is of immense historical and spiritual, as they perceive spiritual, importance to these bloodlines, because that's effectively where they came from. And these bloodlines, I mean, humanity was affected by this interbreeding as it expanded out, of course, but there were key ones that were much more pure, in the sense that the genetics of the gods was much more powerful within them than the general run of the population. And over the centuries, these bloodlines moved out, where they became the kings and the queens and the rulers, wherever they went, out into northern Europe. And they were the bloodlines that created the Roman Empire. Wherever these bloodlines went, empire. There was the Babylonian Empire, there was the Roman Empire. Then they located massively in Britain, and we had the British Empire, and so on. And the French Empire, because they peopled the whole of Europe. Now they became the European royal families and aristocracy, and still are those that remain, but when, as they were the aristocracy all around the world, the Habsburgs, for instance, are among these bloodlines. But when people started reject over control by royal dictatorship, these bloodlines, although some stayed in over-royal situations, like the royal family of Britain, etc., most of them moved out into what I call the dark suit professions. They became the politicians, the lawyers, the bankers, the business people, and they controlled that way. But they are still to themselves royal bloodlines, the bloodlines of the gods. And as they expanded through the British Empire and the other European empires, they expanded the bloodline all over the world. It existed all over the world anyway, because of this interbreeding was global, but these particular Sumer ones were very, very important in terms of the royal lines. And they had the colonies all over the world in their various forms. What then happened was there was a sleight of hand which appeared to be good for the people, but actually not the way it works out. There's two types of control. There's a control you can see, touch and taste: communism, fascism, apartheid, whatever. And in that situation, at least the people know where they stand. They're in a situation where they have no freedom, and they can see at least one level of who's denying them their freedom. And in that situation, you can know where you stand, and you can respond and rebel because you know where you stand. The greatest form of control is the control you cannot see, touch or taste. Symbolically, it's sitting in a prison cell, but you can't see the bars. We have a version of that called democracy. And what happens then is people sit and cook and don't rebel about not being free because they think they are. But covertly, their choices and their ability to express their uniqueness and infinity and potential is fundamentally controlled, even though they think voting every 4 or 5 years means they're free. And so when the bloodlines apparently, or the European empires apparently withdrew from the colonial situation, the colonial control, what they did was left out in those countries the bloodline and the secret society network through which the bloodline manipulates itself or its agents and front people into the key positions of power. And what they created as a result of that, and what is certainly massively there now, is a secret society version of a transnational corporation. The center of this corporation is in Europe for historical reasons, and operational level anyway, because there are other parts of the world where there are also deeper levels of this organization. So you have the headquarters, and in each country, United States, Croatia, Britain, whatever, there is what you might call a subsidiary company. These are secret society networks, and their job is to control that country's government, any political party that has any chance of becoming the government, the banking system, the business system, media ownership, etc. And so when the headquarters dictates the global agenda, these networks in different countries then proceed to introduce that agenda in their sphere of influence. This is why, as I go around the world, indeed, you only got to go on the internet and follow the news, you see the same things being introduced in different countries that apparently have no connection, with the same excuses being used to justify them. You know, they've had a protest here, the students, over fees for education. Well, what they've done in Britain and other places is exactly the same, except we're further ahead. There's now young people leaving college and university, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of pounds, already in debt to the banks to pay for their education, which means those young people's choices are immediately kind of limited, because they now have to serve the system to pay that money back, because they've been put in under the great control mechanism called debt from the earliest of ages. The idea is to make, and my goodness me, are we seeing it or what, to make every country interdependent on every other country, so no one country or one region has independence from the global system over which that country or region has no control. Any independent country, they're trying to pick them off, and they are picking them off. And so what you have is these bloodlines, which the secret society network goes under the term of Illuminati, the illuminated ones, where they use a name at all, that is. When you see all these companies and corporations around the world, they have different names, but ultimately they're controlled by the same families, and they're one corporation. And the idea is to put humanity in a prison of surveillance, control, and microchipping, and limitation of potential and choice that means that they become nothing more than slaves to this elite on a scale which even now we haven't even begun to see. Well, now it gets bloody interesting. I love this bit. So, who are they? Who are they? Who is this non-human race that all these ancient cultures and legends talk about, interbred with humanity to create this hybrid bloodline and indeed change the genetics of the human form? Well, over the last kind of, I guess, 10, 12 years, this information started to come in, and it's coming all over the world now. The key ones seem to take a reptilian form. And, of course, we decode a tiny frequency range within infinity, and we think that we know it all. And because it's different to what we are used to, then it can't exist. It must be crazy. It's an interesting fact that if you want to control people's perception of what's possible, then you just limit the information they receive about what is possible. It's real simple. And then they'll believe what's possible is what they've been told is possible. And so they will dismiss by reflex action, laugh and snigger at something that is happening just because it's different, because they're stuck in mind. Now, DNA is a software program. It holds different information, just like different software programs do. And this hybrid DNA, this reptilian human DNA, shall we say, the royal bloodlines and the other effects on all of us, although lesser than the pure ones, is a software program which is information, which therefore affects not only the way we perceive reality, it affects the way we decode reality. And I would say firewalls the computer in the way I was talking earlier. And it's interesting, the fall of man, symbolically, was caused by what? A snake. And what, you know, I was on a Christian radio station last year, and they were going on, this reptilian's a load of rubbish. I said, really, do you believe the Bible? Oh, I believe the Bible. I said, well, do you think the snake in the Garden of Eden, the serpent in the Garden of Eden, was literally a snake talking to Adam and Eve? Do you actually believe that was exactly what it is? Or do you think it might be symbolic for something else? And it kind of did make some of them think, oh, well, hold on a second, yeah. And it's funny how, you know, people dismiss some of the things that people think because they're crazy. And then again, it's cognitive dissonance. They don't look at what they're saying. I'm not saying they shouldn't believe it. Believe what you like. It's a human right. But I mean, please look at your own beliefs before you start writing off others as crazy. And what this interbreeding did was affect the human DNA, and it put a bigger reptilian input into it. And interestingly, the caduceus, which is now the symbol of the medical profession, is a symbol of the DNA and enlightenment, kundalini and all that stuff, and it's symbolized as snakes. And the snake symbolism and the serpent symbolism around the world is absolutely unbelievable. Before I got into this, I wasn't aware of it, but of course you do research and you follow it through. The serpent symbolism in religions and cultures and bloodlines and origins of kings and queens all over the world is absolutely staggering. This is a painting of one of these reptilian entities from ancient modern descriptions, although there are many versions, just like they are humans, by Credo Mutwa, the Zulu shaman, who I'll get to shortly. And this is a symbolic painting by Neil Haig of this hybrid bloodline. And they became known also as the demigods, you know, part human, part god, because of this interbreeding. And this change in the DNA, again the snake, did something to the human form and its ability to connect. I would suggest, the more that I go into this, and I'm gathering more and more information all the time by the day now, it seems to be this area is coming into my life a lot. It's like firewalling off a computer to limit what it can perceive and decode. And for me, the fall of man, as it is described, was a fall down the frequencies, or at least a fall down the range of frequencies that we could perceive as a matter of course. Because, of course, you'll see cats and other animals reacting to what is to us empty space. What's the cat doing? There's nothing there. Well, there is to the cat, because it's got a wider visual frequency range it can access. It sees more than we do. That's why it's reacting to what is to us empty space. And this firewall affected, because it was affecting the DNA, which is the receiver-transmitter, and the crystalline system also, our ability to decode reality. And therefore make it more difficult to hold a connection to consciousness while we're in this mind reality, this virtual reality. And so for me anyway, I mean, people just have to make their own minds up on this stuff, it's just information. The exclusion from the garden, symbolically, something else that you find around the world, not just in the Bible, long before the Bible, the exclusion of Adam and Eve from the garden was the exclusion from realities that they could, that humans could access before, because Adam and Eve is symbolic of a human form. They're not kind of individuals necessarily. Now, the worship of the serpent, official mainstream science and anthropology, is the oldest form of worship. It's been taken back so far 70,000 years, which certainly fits, and then some, with the Sumerian tablets timescale of when the Anunnaki came. These tablets connect the Anunnaki to their kings going back 240,000 years. Because this golden age wasn't, you know, a week on Tuesday and within an hour in the month. It was a long period of life on Earth, which history has shut out, official history. And 70,000 years ago, people in South Africa, what are called the Sand people, the Bush people, Bushmen, were worshipping the serpent as a god. And all these different groups in these different cultures, when you go into it, you go, oh my goodness me, you had no idea till you look at this, how universal this was. The Druids, they worshipped a serpent god called Hu. And so Hu-man actually translates in that interpretation as serpent man. And the under different names, the serpent gods and the serpent god are just universal. Now, in the same area where Sumer, this very advanced civilization, appeared around 4000 BC, something like that, through to 2000 BC, around then. Before that, in the same area of Mesopotamia, was something called the Ubaid people, the Ubaid culture. And in their graves have been found these serpent images of their gods, and many of them are holding babies, like the mother and child, which will become maybe interesting later on. It's also interesting that these reptilian gods were supposed to have elongated skulls. And again, as seen in that image from the Ubaid period, thousands and thousands of years BC. And there have been skulls found that have this incredible elongated skull. And there's another one there, the skull that was found. And the Egyptians, for instance, among others, they depicted their gods and goddesses with elongated skulls. Now, of course, there are people, again, another one, with the big hats, the high hats, the elongated skull that you see so often in Egypt. Now, you do find this among some native peoples, where they take the children and they bind their heads, I mean, God, the thought of it, so tightly from a birth, and it elongates the skull. And when they're asked why they do this, they say, and Craig Muchwa told me a lot about what goes on in Africa from that point of view, they say it's to make our children like the gods. Again, it's this carryover from the gods with the elongated skulls. Now, one of the ways that they symbolized these bloodlines and these gods as part human, part snake was like this. You see loads of these, where it's part human and then the rest is like a snake or a serpent. These are kind of endless numbers of these images all around the world in different cultures. And here's another example where you're human and then you are part serpent. This is the hybrid bloodline that I'm talking about, symbolized in ancient architecture, etc. You get the symbolism of the people, humans, fighting giant snakes. Again, all symbolic. There again is a goddess who becomes, in the lower half, a snake. There you get the story of humans fighting the snake and all the rest of it, symbolic of this. Again, the cobra and the symbol of the cobra is an Illuminati symbol in many ways. And going way back, it's a symbol in Egypt where the cobra is symbolized in the way that they symbolize their pharaohs, etc. Says here, beard styled to resemble underbelly of cobra. Cobra emerging from the top of the head. Headdress like the cobra. And wherever you go, and I've been researching this now for the best part of a decade, it's unbelievable. And the other interesting thing, because of where we're going, is at least there came a time, if not from the start, when the worship of the sun and the worship of the serpent kind of became one and moved as one unit. It's like the reptilian hybrid religion, the worship of the sun and the worship of the moon goddess, etc. Again, here we have the cobra symbol of a god or goddess in another part of the world. And you see them all over the place. And somebody sent me these statue images, again, of the symbolism of the serpent and the human woman, the interbreeding, and the dual hybrid nature, part human, part serpent, part human, part serpent. And these gargoyles that you see on the stately homes and castles of these elite bloodlines, again, symbolic of these entities. The dragon or the serpent you find as a regular symbol on the coats of arms of these families. The crest of the City of London. By City of London, I mean the financial district of London, the original London before it became the great sprawl it is today. That is the two flying dragons holding the red cross on the white background, which is the shield of the Knights Templar secret society, which is massively part of this network of secret societies. It's a closer look at it. When you go into the City of London, you pass these flying reptiles on both sides of the road holding those shields. At the point where the City of London meets something called the Temple, and it's called the Temple in London because it's named after the Knights Templar Temple, where those two very important areas of London meet in terms of global control and manipulation, you have this big reptile in the middle of the road at a place known as Temple Bar. Again, the dragon and the serpent monster and all the rest of it is universal around the world. Of course, in the East, like in China and Japan, etc., it's the national symbol, the dragon. And the ancient Chinese emperors used to claim the right to be emperor because of their descendants from what they called the serpent gods. Again, it goes on and on and on. Messiah comes from Mesa, apparently, according to some researchers, and Christ means anointed one. And the Mesa is the crocodile, the Nile crocodile, and they used to use the fat of the Nile crocodile to anoint people in ceremonies in Egypt, and that oil is still used, the symbolism of the oil, and so much Middle Eastern and Israel symbolism and names and what have you, when we crown the monarch of Britain. In the Bible, the Satan figure, whatever you want to call him, is described in dragon terms, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now that great dragon, the Druid god Yu, was known as the great dragon ruler of the world to the Druids. So Credo Mutwa, a great friend of mine, when I first met him, was in South Africa in the late 90s. I think it's about 98. And I met him and we had a chat. And we haven't talked about any of this stuff, but other things. And then I went back just after I'd published a book called The Biggest Secret. And he's on the phone as soon as I get there saying, I must talk to you. How do you know about the Chitahuri? Who the hell are the Chitahuri? Well, the Chitahuri, because The Biggest Secret was the first book I wrote where I introduced this whole reptilian theme. The Chitahuri in South African legend are the children of the serpent or the children of the python. They are this hybrid bloodline known as the Chitahuri in South Africa. And I talked to him, and I did a DVD of about 6.5 hours talking to him about this. And he's telling me all the African legends that he learned in his development as a shaman over like 50 years or more. He's in his late 80s now. And they mirrored what I was finding out all over the world. And he showed me artifacts he had, like this necklace of the mysteries, as he calls it. Not really a necklace, it goes on the shoulders and it's so bloody heavy. I don't know how it is age, he bloody walks around with it, but he does sometimes. And on the necklace of the mysteries are these symbols through which he is the official storyteller of the Zulu nation and the official historian of the Zulu nation. He tells the story of the development of people in Africa, African people. And the pride of place at the front is this human woman and this clearly non-human entity with a big willy, which, he told me, used to be golden until someone stole it and they couldn't afford to replace the gold, so a copper one was put in its place. Now that, from South Africa, mirrors the story, the big story at the heart of Egyptian myth, of the golden penis of Osiris, which was also told, in effect, about Nimrod, the Osiris figure in Babylon, who I'll certainly come to as we go along, because it's very, very important to understanding so much about what's going on today. And these stories are relating, that he tells from the legends, of an interbreeding between a non-human race, the Chitahuri, and human women to create a hybrid bloodline. There's the human woman, there's the non-human entity. Now, why does it look like that? This is the reason why, at best, these entities and their hybrids are symbolized by snakes and animals, like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, because, according to legend, the Chitahuri said to the people, you must never depict us as we really look. So what they did, they used kind of snake symbolism, or they made them look absolutely ludicrously not human, to show that we're not talking about human interbreeding, but non-human human interbreeding. Now, on the side of Credo's hut, he has painted this picture of a snake eating a human from African legends about the Chitauri eating humans. And it's interesting that you find that on the Alfa Romeo symbol alongside the red cross on the white background, which is the Knights Templar Secret Society. And in the garden of Silvio Berlusconi, the leader of Italy, God knows how, were they all drunk, you have the same thing of the snake eating a human. This is from ancient myth about the Chitauri. Now, a lot of these fairy stories about frogs turning into princes and all that stuff are all linked to these kind of legends about this interbreeding and this hybrid race. And it's amazing what you find. This is a book in America, I think a series of books someone was telling me, but certainly one book for children. It's in the schools, and it's about shape-shifting reptilians between human and reptilian, which these bloodlines, in their purest form, mind, can do. And, throughout history and cultures all over the world, you see, not just reptilian, but in many different forms, you see the story of shape-shifting. Now, when I started meeting people all over the world, I don't go looking for this, but I started meeting people from about 96, 97, who all over the world who were telling me stories about how they'd experienced seeing someone who looked human and turning into a reptilian figure and then going back again. And you think, hold on, when you hear one or two, you go, ooh. Not sure about that. So you stick it on the back burner, and as I do, and I wait and see where it goes. Well, where it went was loads of other stories around the world of the same thing. Now, this is why the first part of today was so important, because if we don't understand the nature of reality and its illusory physicality, then, people say, you can't go from physical body to physical body and back again. No, you can't. I absolutely agree with you. But that's not what happens. The only place the shapeshift happens is in your head, in the decoding system. When you have an energy field shift, then you are decoding an energy field like, the energy form into the holographic form. And then when that energy field shifts, which is not solid, it's movable because it's energy, then you start to decode a different form of that energy. And to your perception, you see a apparently solid body human, then you see it reptilian, sometimes other forms as well, and then you see it human again. And of course, without understanding the nature of reality, you go, that's impossible. No, it's not. It's all gone on in your head. It's just like flicking a television channel zapper button from one to another. Now, hey, that's kind of relevant, isn't it? She should come up. I'm not getting a knighthood, by the way, in Britain. I think it's when I said she was a Satanist, shape-shifted reptilian. I think that cost me in the end. I'm not sure. So the physical form is a hologram. It's not solid, and that's why it can shift if you know what you're doing, because it happens in there within this short frequency range. So these entities, these reptilian entities, appear to exist just outside, as a matter of course, outside of visible light. So in the natural course of events, what we're decoding is that which exists within visible light. So we see humans everywhere. But just outside of visible light are entities that are anything but human. And this is where we see ghostly figures too. The reason a ghost looks ethereal rather than solid is it's not quite on the same frequency that we are. So when you get two radio stations that are not quite on the dial, you don't get sharp reception, you get what we call interference. This is a visual version of interference. And if we were on the same wavelength as the, quote, ghost, it would look as solid as you and me do. But because it's not, it looks ethereal. And this is a thing that has been a constant theme through this period since this subject entered my life. And that is psychic people whose visual acuity is outside the norm, who've told me how they've seen reptilian-type, ethereal-type entities connected to people in human form through these lower two vortex points, what we call chakra points. And of course, one of the great themes throughout history and ancient peoples, right up to today, is that of possession. Possession by demonic entities that take over a person's mental, emotional, and therefore physical responses, perceptions, etc. And I started to understand why this hybrid DNA, these bloodlines were necessary. These entities operate just outside of visible light. As I said earlier, if I'm going to interact with this reality, I need a form within this reality to interact with it. So what they've done is created hybrid bloodlines which have a vibrational resonance because of the genetic makeup to these entities, which means they can make a vibrational possession with these particular bloodlines much more powerfully than they can with the general population, which all of us have tremendous reptilian genetics, I'll get to in a minute, but these bloodlines are and then some. And so this seems to be the game. You use your secret society network to manipulate these hybrid bloodlines into power, and as they go into power, what's really going into power is the entity possessing the physical body. But because we're only decoding reality within the visible light spectrum, when we look at these people, we see physical bodies. We see human George Bush. We see human Queen of England. But if you could just tease out, just beyond visible light, you would see overshadowing these people something very, very, anything but human. And so these people that end up in these positions of power, or a lot of them anyway, are vehicles. And so these are what I call come-and-go politicians who just come and go and all the rest of it. But all they are vehicles to allow these entities to manipulate this reality through their outer vehicle. So you have the politicians in the dark suits, then you have the shadow people, the advisors and all those people that have the real power in human form. And then you have behind them these entities that operate just outside of visible light and possess these entities and control their mental and emotional processes. And one important thing to stress, which will make a lot of sense of the world, is that one key aspect of this hybrid DNA, this pure one, this one that's more reptilian than general population, is that they don't have the most important balancer of behavior, and that is empathy. If I have empathy with someone who's going to suffer the consequences of my actions, that empathy stops me taking those actions. If I do not have the ability to empathize because that has been deleted from the program, then anything goes. Starving children in a world of plenty because of the way I manipulate the economy, I have no emotional consequence for that because I have no empathy with those people. Same with kids killed in Gaza. Look, it's gone back to Vietnam and before, and bombing cities full of civilians. To us who have empathy, wouldn't even consider it horrific, grotesque, my God. But without empathy, there is no emotional problem whatsoever. And so what we're looking at seems more and more clear to me is that these particular bloodlines that end up in the positions of power and behind the positions of power are possessed entities. On one level they're human, but if you could see further on, they'd be anything but human. Someone sent me this picture off the internet with this kind of reptilian eye. I'm not saying it might be just the light, whatever, I'm not saying that, but I'm using it as an example. So many people have told me how they've seen people's eyes shift like that into a reptilian form, which seems to be the first thing to go. But full body shifts are ridiculously common around the world, but of course not many people talk about it, because what do people say? You're mad. Now, I've got a friend who's an associate of an expert in iris development and all the rest of it in terms of the technology. I don't agree with it. The technology that uses your iris to read your code so you go through airports without going through the various checks and everything. Anyway, whatever. This guy who was doing this, he looked at 2,300 pairs of eyes as a result of researching this technology. He has no idea that my friend is a friend of mine or what I'm talking about. What he said to my friend is what surprised him greatly when he did this research and when he's looking into eyes through microscopes, etc., is that of the 2,300 eyes he scanned, around 4% appeared to be of reptilian type and appearance. George Bush, somebody sent me that one. Again, it might be the light, probably is, but it's very symbolic. And again, you know, we've got the Queen. Somebody produced that on the front of a magazine in Britain to, you know, ridicule me. I thought, thank you very much, I'll use that. And again, symbolic, but all these bloodlines, these royal bloodlines, that's again a depiction of someone from royalty in the ancient world with a cobra again. It's like the serpent and royal bloodlines go hand in hand wherever you go. There's Dick. There you go. Oh yeah, another thing, people who've worked with satanically abused people who've been put through satanic ritual and satanic abuse and ritual abuse, a number of them have written to me, and one of them sent me these drawings with his client's permission, of course. What they do is they try to get them to bring out their inner memories and the suppressed, blocked memories of what happened by drawing. And this lady drew images of what she's experienced during these rituals. And again, they draw reptilian eyes and reptilian people. And again, the idea of possession, and often possession by reptilian entities, goes way, way, way back. Because the DNA is a software program, and the idea is to hold that software program by only interbreeding with your own kind. This is where this obsession with elite bloodlines and royal and aristocratic bloodlines, and now the elite business and banking families, interbreeding with each other. Not through love, but through genetics. And because once you breed out of this bloodline, this pure bloodline, very quickly that software program is diluted so that it doesn't behave in the same way. So Neil Haig did that one of Tony Blair. So you look at these people and you see the human level, but what's behind them? Behind the painted smile. Behind the eyes. This guy, I had an amazing experience with him before I was into any of this, which absolutely showed me that the world isn't what we thought it was. When his eyes flipped, back in 1989, when I was not into any of this stuff at all, I wondered what the hell I was looking at. Ted Heath, he was the man who, more than any other politician in Britain, took us into the European community that became the European Union. And he's a Satanist and child killer, and I've said that publicly in Britain. He's dead now, but I said it long before he died, and I'm still waiting for the writ because it's true. What's behind these people? We see the human level. Oh, there, she's not even shifting, look at them eyes. Eh? Which one's the reptilian there? Now, this man, Carl Sagan, very famous cosmologist, very respected in the realms of academia, etc., he wrote a book called The Dragons of Eden, which looked at the influence of our reptilian genetics on human behavior. And he says in there that you cannot understand human behavior without looking at the reptilian aspects of the human form. Because a key major part of the human brain is known by scientists as the R complex, or the reptilian brain. Goes down into the brainstem here. And from this part of the brain, of course that's balanced out by other parts of the brain, But from this reptilian brain, this is mainstream science I'm quoting now, not, sitting in a darkened room. From here we get primitive and emotional responses. It is our primitive and emotional responses that allow the few to control the many. It's they that override rational, conscious thought so that we react to fear stories and manufactured crises with emotional responses that then give people permission to offer the solutions to those problems. Oh! Swine flu, get me a mask! Emotional response. Rational response, they played the scam 3 years ago. It's a load of crap. And so, other parts of this reptilian brain give us cold-blooded behavior and territoriality, wanting to own, control. A desire to control, an obsession with hierarchical structures of power. There are no group of people on this planet more obsessed with hierarchical structures of power than these hybrid families. From the reptilian brain we get a regression, the belief that might is right, winner takes all. This is mainstream science I'm quoting here. Why? Because they have far more of this genetics than the general population, and therefore they're influenced much more by it. What is the reptilian brain about? Survival. Now there are some good things about that, because it allows us to survive and keep the body alive so we can experience here a bit longer. But when that becomes the focus of our perception, that we have to keep surviving, what does that do? It moves us, in terms of our perception of reality, into the reptilian brain. Global warming, reptilian brain. Terrorism, reptilian brain. Fear of the future. What's going to happen to the kids? Reptilian brain. Survival. The survival mechanism, or the reaction to danger, that psychologists call fight or flight. Hit the guy or run. All from the reptilian brain. Emotional responses. Primitive emotional responses. Now this society is structured with its manipulation of events and perception to put the population in the reptilian brain for much of their existence here.
The opportunity to have power for nothing, which means you have to serve the system less to earn the money to pay for the power. So he wasn't a popular guy once he started tapping into this knowledge. And the thing about free energy technology is that we're now seeing what level of reality that he was talking about tapping into. We have an understanding now, increasingly through an area of scientific research known as the electric universe, that we are surrounded by electrical and electromagnetic fields, that actually the great communication system within this, what I say is a simulation, is understandably through electricity. We interact with the universe electrically. The brain works electrically. The genetic system also works electrically. And what he saw was the potential of tapping into that electrical, electromagnetic level of reality and turning it into usable warmth and power, which brings me to climate change. This is something that those that are pushing the climate change hoax, I don't mean the people behind the hoax that have generated it, I mean those who have bought the hoax and push it and say we've got to destroy beautiful landscapes with wind turbines all over the world. They need to just take a breath and do a bit of research, because we're told that we have to go down that road of power generation because we have to stop burning fossil fuels. Actually, when you get into the breakdown of so-called greenhouse gases, right up into the 90% are clouds and water vapor. And CO2, generated in part by human activity, but vastly more by natural means, is only a tiny fraction of the greenhouse gas breakdown. So even on that level, the idea that human activity is changing the climate, nonsense. And there are scientists who are being suppressed and not given a platform who are saying too, it's nonsense. But let's say that it's true. Let's go down that road in terms of Tesla. We're told that we have to go down all the roads of wind turbines and all the rest of it, and cut fossil fuel use. But here, I mean, this man died in a New York hotel room in 1943. In the first half of the 20th century, he understood how you create free energy technology that doesn't involve fossil fuels. And he said it. He said that all around us, he said, is all the power we need without having to use oil or gas or coal. So here's the question then. Why, if it's so desperate for us to stop using fossil fuels, so it's claimed, why is the technology of Tesla to give us all the usable power and warmth we need from the atmosphere around us, why is that being suppressed by the very same forces that are pushing the climate change hoax? Because it is a hoax. And it's no good people saying, oh, well, maybe they don't know about the Tesla technology. So much of what we have today, high technology, is based on Tesla's understanding. For instance, something that's become notorious in the last 20 years or so is HAARP in Alaska, and so-called ionosphere heater, which fires very high-powered radio waves at the ionosphere in the upper atmosphere, and then bounces them back at higher power, having got the ionosphere to vibrate in sympathy and increase the power. And they can change the weather, and they can create earthquakes. Tesla, for instance, was creating lightning above his laboratory using these techniques. He, at one point, had all the area around him vibrating like a mini earthquake, and all the windows were breaking because of technology that he was inventing.
It's a series of particles that have been put into that shape purely by playing sound of a certain note across the particles. So when we sit in meditation, we go, well, not that I do much actually, I just get on with my life, but a lot of people do, and good luck to them. And you go into this place of silence, of no thing, of no thought, consciousness, the all-knowing. And in the realm of creation, from that no thing, that all possibility, we have different dimensions of experience reality which are different frequency ranges. So we have higher dimensions from this one, we have lower dimensions from this one, and, you know, keep out of them, I would say, for reasons I'll come to. But in that little frequency range in the middle, where our vehicle is decoding the frequency range of that dimension we call the physical world, that's where we are experiencing all the things we think is everything. But there are many other dimensions, and they interact with this one, which will become very important in the second half. Now, the body is a biological computer. By biological, I mean it has the ability to think for itself and assess information, not just react to data in a programmed way. It has the ability to think for itself up to a point. And it is the vehicle through which we experience this reality. When you want to go on the internet, you can't just go on the internet. You have to have an interface, a vehicle that takes you onto the internet so you can experience it, and we call it a computer. Well, in the same way, obviously in a vastly more sophisticated way, consciousness experiences this reality, formless consciousness experiences this reality through the body computer that we also call mind. It's like a genetic spacesuit that allows us to experience somewhere that normally we couldn't do. I mean, if I didn't have an outer shell that vibrated within the frequency range that I want to experience, I couldn't pick that bottle up. My consciousness...
And developing. So when you look at the patents for the HARP technology, it even mentions Tesla. So they know all about it, and they know the potential of it. They absolutely know the potential for giving everyone free energy sources from the very reality that we're interacting with without use of fossil fuels. Why is this never mentioned? Because climate change, the hoax, is about justifying the transformation of human society in ways that I explain in the books and the talks. And that transformation cannot take place in the way that they plan if people have access to free energy technology, and thus the world doesn't have to then change. They have no excuse to change it in the way they want. And that's the reason why they say on one side climate change is destroying the world, brackets, nonsense, but on the other they're suppressing this man's knowledge and this man's technological inventions that would transform the world. I mean, no one needs to be cold anymore. No one needs to be without power anymore. It's all there, and it's being suppressed. And this guy is still being acknowledged for the greatness that he brought to science. All these decades later, he was so far ahead of the game. And what people need to do today, not least the climate change zealots, is to get some research done, look into what this guy, Nikola Tesla, created and shown was possible, and then start asking yourself, why is this being suppressed at the very time we're told that we need to change the way that we generate power? Answer that, and the climate change hoax becomes blatantly obvious.
And when you bring sound into things, you can create form through sound as it comes out of the no thing. This is
Tesla that understood how you can tap in to the electromagnetic, electrical reality beyond the world of the scene and turn it into usable warmth and power. Got a little list here of what Tesla created. This is just some of them. Alternating current and the electrical systems basically we use today. Fluorescent lights, he invented those 40 years before they were actually officially invented and put into production. X-rays was something else that he understood because he could see that there were other levels of reality and you could tap into it through electrical and electromagnetic means, radiation means. Radio. Tesla was on to the whole principle of radio before Marconi. Marconi gets the plaudits as the person who invented radio, but actually Tesla beat him to it. Remote control. I mean, we take remote control technology for granted today, but he was the first one that saw the potential of it and showed how it could work. Electric motors come down to Tesla. The laser, of course, which is absolutely at the heart of so much modern technology, goes back again to Tesla. And then wireless. Oh yeah, I've got Wi-Fi. Yeah, we're all got Wi-Fi. Yeah, wireless communication was seen and understood and showed to work by Tesla. But the big thing, which leads us into so much that Tesla showed was possible, showed would work, is what we call free energy technology. And in many ways, this was his downfall, because the last thing that the system wants is free energy for everybody. And what I mean by that is free energy in the sense that you just tap into energetic electrical, electromagnetic fields that are already there, and free in terms of once you have the technology in place, you can tap into it at no cost. Now, of course, this is the worst nightmare of the system, because it gives people the